Now the last section is number 7 for chapter 1. It is 2 objectives. It's number 20 and 21. 20, you're going to interpret findings from a double box plot. 21, compare and contrast histogram and box plot graphs. This section is really about writing with statistics, so let's look at some examples and get some vocab out of the way. When you write about statistics, there are some things you should keep in mind. And this slide is really just giving you some pointers, and let's just look at those. When you write about data, writing should be clear enough so the reader can create mental images from them. Right? You're going to want to make a conclusion about your findings. In doing so, you should compare and contrast data sets. And it's important that you do both compare and contrast. You talk about both sides of the story, and you talk about their similarities and differences when you do that. Obviously, comparing is the similarities, contrasting is its differences. Number 3, you want to use math vocabulary from your previous learning. So use as much good, solid vocab in the correct way. And then the last thing is support your findings with numbers and statistics. Now in this section you're going to be asked to compare histograms and box plots. So when you are comparing them, the first thing to look at for a histogram is this. You want to look at the frequency and the relative frequency, because that's really what a histogram is about, is either the counts by interval or the percentages by intervals. If you're comparing box plots for number 2, in box plots you want to look at the quartiles and the percentiles, because that's what box plots are all about. And then the third thing is, if you're looking at statistical data, statistical summaries look at the measure of center and spread. So when you talk about the measures of center, we're talking mean and median. Measures of spread, we're talking range, interquartile range, and just being descriptive in terms of all of that numerical statistical data. Now, really, this is the main example we're going to look at for these notes, so let's take a look at what's in front of us. Below and at the right are histograms, statistical summaries, and box plots of the distribution of heights in inches of all the players in the National Basketball Association and the National Football League during the 2007-2008 season. So again, let's just take a quick peek. These are the statistics that were gathered. We have height in inches, the NBA, the NFL, mean and median, which is measures of center, interquartile range, standard deviation and range, which are our measures of spread. Here are the box plots. Remember, the box plots let us visually see the quartiles and the percentiles. And then we have here, it looks like the relative frequency histograms for both the NBA and the NFL. And let's just talk about step 1 in here. They want us to write a sentence about one piece of information conveyed by the statistical summaries table to compare the NBA and the NFL player heights. So what you want to do in a problem like this is they're going to tell you what to look at. Okay, fine. Statistical summaries. That's what they want you to talk about. On that previous slide, I mentioned if they talk about statistical summaries, you want to talk about the measures of center and then talk about your measures of spread. And it's really good to compare and contrast. But in here, they just want to be very general. Write a sentence about one piece of information. So if we were writing about all of it, we'd have to mention all the mean, the median, and all that good information. Here, let's just pick one and write a sentence. So one thing you could say is something like this for step 1. You might say that both the mean and the median of the NBA players are higher than those of the NFL. Now, in this statement, I would say there's one thing that's missing, though. Both mean and median of the NBA players. Of what specifically? Of the heights of the NBA players. I should have said that. So both the mean and median of the heights of the NBA players are higher than those of the NFL. This indicates to me that indicating the NBA is taller. That's the conclusion I can make. Okay. Now, step 2 says, write one sentence describing a comparison of the NBA and the NFL player, their heights, that the box plot tells you. That's not found in the table. Now, the box plot, again, talks about quartiles and percentiles. They want us to mention something that the box plot tells us in comparing these two that the statistics do not tell us. So what we might be able to see is we can see the median in both, so that would be redundant. Okay, we can actually see the range in the box plot, so that would be redundant. And we can see the interquartile range. One of the things I didn't talk about are percentiles, though. So why don't we mention that? We could say something of this nature for step 2. We could say the tallest NBA player is much taller than that of the tallest NFL player. Here's our tallest NBA player than the NFL, and put some numbers with it. So I'm not going to write it down, but let me say it. One sentence describing the comparison of these two. Again, we could say the tallest NBA player at 90 inches is much taller than that of the tallest NFL player at approximately 82 inches tall. Okay. Another thing you might say is the quartile. You could say the 75th tallest NBA player, who's going to be about right here at about 83 inches, is by far taller than the 75th NFL player, who's at about 77 inches. And that would be talking about the percentiles. Okay, step 3. Write one sentence comparing NFL and NBA player heights using a piece of information from the two histograms that is not found in either of the box plot or the statistical tables. Now, histogram, remember the histograms, those are going to give you information about frequency. Okay, so think about something that we see in the histogram that we do not see in either the statistics nor in the box plot. Well, one of the things you might remember about histograms is we talked about how skewed they might be. If you take a look at the NFL base or football players here and their heights, and you kind of do that curve, that is actually fairly symmetric of a distribution. If you look at the NBA, you're going to see there's a slight skewedness to this graph. And the heights of these are skewed to the left. So one thing you could say for part 3 is this. The heights of the NBA players are slightly skewed to the left, whereas the heights of the NFL players tend to be symmetric. And that would work. Another thing to say is about the intervals. You could find the interval that is the highest for each one. The NFL has the heights, it looks like here, between 74 and 76 inches, has the larger portion of the players in the NFL are heights between 74 and 76 inches, whereas the highest portion of the NBA players are in the interval between 78 and 80 inches. That would be a valid comparison. So just think about how you would talk about each graph uniquely. Now on this slide, I think we already touched on it and it's redundant to talk about. The only thing I will say here is they want you to look at the NBA and NFL players again. The description comparing the heights on a histogram, we talked about the skewedness. We picked an interval and compared an interval. Box plots, pick a percentile or a quartile. When we talk statistical summaries, compare the measures of center or the measures of spread and how they are similar and how are they different and by how much. Now, as part of your homework assignment, I am going to have you end up doing activity 2 here, and let me just talk through what it's going to be. One of the clicker questions I'm going to have you do in class when after we do the entrance card is I'm going to ask you this. How many states you've lived in your lifetime? Well, let's look at the data here. It says here, the table, histogram, and box plot below describe the number of states visited by a sample of 20 adults in their lifetime. A visit means that the person stayed for at least one night, drove, or took a train through, or was in the airport. Flying over does not count. Okay. The count includes a person's home state. Now, of the 20 people, here are the statistics from it, the box plot, and the histogram. I'm going to have us do, as a class, step 1. We're going to collect the data about how many states people in our class have visited. What you're going to need to do is starting your homework. It says for the collected data, create a summary table, histogram, and box plot. You need to do this for our class data. Then you're going to go through and address these 3 bullet points right here in comparing the data. You're basically going to compare the sets of data, what you see on the screen here, and our class data in terms of the summary statistics, in terms of the different box plot, and in the histograms. And if you're looking for that activity, it's going to be on page 56. That is the first part of your assignment, which is just what you saw in the packet. The last part of your assignment is going to be, if you're modified based on the entrance card here, if you're not, it will be to just talk about some statistics. Remember, folks, when writing about statistics, use complete sentences. Do not abbreviate. And let me know what questions you have on this assignment. Good luck.